what you love relentlessly, let me tell you something. That sounds simple, but changes everything once you truly understand it. You cannot build a great life around something you don't love. You can survive. You can earn. You can even succeed by other people's standards, but you won't create anything extraordinary, because extraordinary work requires something deeper than effort. It requires obsession. When you love what you do, it doesn't feel like obligation. It feels like something you have to do, something you're pulled toward, not pushed into, and that's important. Because the path to doing something meaningful is not easy. It's long, uncertain, full of moments where nothing seems to work. There will be days when you question everything, days when progress feels invisible, days when it would be easier to quit and choose something safer. And in those moments, love is what keeps you going, not motivation, not discipline alone, love. Because when you care deeply about something, you don't walk away from it easily. You stay, you try again, you find another way. Most people never reach that level. They choose what's practical, what's expected, what feels secure. And at first, it works. They move forward, they check boxes. They build a life that looks right on the outside. But inside, something is missing, because they're not connected to what they're doing. They're just going through it. And over time, that disconnect grows. It turns into frustration, into boredom, into a quiet sense that something isn't right. That's the cost of ignoring what you love. But here's the truth: you don't always find what you love immediately. It's not always obvious. Sometimes you have to explore, try different things, make mistakes, follow curiosity, even when it doesn't lead anywhere at first. Because clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing, from experiencing, from paying attention to what excites you, what pulls you in, what makes you lose track of time. Those are signals, clues. And if you follow them, they lead you somewhere meaningful. But you have to be willing to listen. And that's where most people struggle. Because following what you love often means going against the expected path. It means taking risks, facing uncertainty, choosing something that doesn't come with guarantees. And that's uncomfortable. So people hesitate. They wait for the right time, for more certainty, for permission. But that moment never comes. Because there is no perfect time to follow what you love. There's only a decision, a choice to start, even if it's small, even if it's unclear, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Because once you start, things begin to change. You gain experience. You build skills. You start to understand what matters and what doesn't. And slowly, your path becomes clearer. But here's something important: loving what you do doesn't mean it's always easy. It doesn't mean every day feels great. There will still be challenges, still be frustration, still be moments when you struggle. But the difference is, you care enough to push through them. You're willing to stay in the process, to keep improving, to keep showing up even when it's hard. And that consistency is what leads to mastery. Because when you love something, you spend more time with it. You go deeper. You pay attention to the details. You refine again and again until it becomes something exceptional. That's how great work is created. Not through talent alone, but through time, focus, and a deep connection to what you're doing. So don't chase what looks successful. Don't follow paths just because they're popular. Because success without meaning doesn't last. It doesn't fulfill you. It doesn't push you to grow. Instead, find what matters to you, what excites you, what challenges you in a way that feels worth it, and follow that relentlessly, even when it's uncertain, even when it's difficult, even when it takes time. Because that's the path that leads to something real, something meaningful, something that reflects who you are, not who the world expects you to be. And when you build your life around that, you don't just work, you create. You don't just succeed, you matter. And that is what makes everything worth it. Focus is everything. Let me tell you something most people completely misunderstand. Focus is not about doing more. It's about doing less, but better. We live in a world that celebrates busyness, more tasks, more goals, more opportunities. It feels productive. It looks impressive, but it's a trap. Because every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. And most people say yes to too many things. They divide their energy. They scatter their attention. They move in multiple directions without going deep in any of them. And the result? Average work. Because greatness doesn't come from doing everything. It comes from doing one thing exceptionally well. When we built products, we made a decision that most people didn't understand. We chose to focus, to cut down, to eliminate. We said no to hundreds of ideas so we could say yes to a few that truly mattered. And that wasn't easy, because those ideas weren't bad. Many of them were good, interesting, exciting, full of potential, but they weren't essential. And that's the key. You don't get to greatness by chasing every good idea. You get there by committing to the right one. And that requires discipline. The discipline to ignore distractions. The discipline to stay on course even when something new and exciting appears. Because distractions don't always look like problems. Sometimes they look like opportunities, and that's what makes them dangerous. They pull your attention away slowly, quietly, until you lose focus on what actually matters. That's why focus is a decision you have to make every single day. It's not something you achieve once. It's something you protect again and again. You have to ask yourself, what truly matters right now? What is the one thing that deserves my full attention? And then you commit to it fully, without hesitation, without dividing your energy. Because focus is not just about time, it's about presence. Being fully engaged with what you're doing, not thinking about something else, not switching between tasks, but going deep. Because depth is where quality comes from. It's where ideas evolve, where details are refined, where something good becomes great. But depth requires time, and time requires you to slow down, to resist the urge to rush, to resist the pressure to do more. Because doing more often means achieving less. It creates noise. It creates confusion. And confusion kills progress. Clarity comes from focus, from simplifying your direction, from knowing exactly what you're working toward and why it matters. And once you have that clarity, everything else becomes easier. Decisions become simpler. Because you know what aligns and what doesn't. You know what to say yes to and what to reject. And that's powerful. Because most people struggle not because they lack ability, but because they lack focus. They have the potential, they have the ideas, but they don't commit, they don't go all in. And without that commitment, nothing truly great is built. So if you want to do something meaningful, you have to choose. You have to decide what matters most. And then give it your full attention, your full energy, your full effort. Because divided attention creates divided results. But focused attention creates momentum. And momentum is what moves you forward. It builds progress. It builds confidence. It builds something real. So don't try to do everything. Don't chase every opportunity. Don't fill your life with distractions that feel productive but lead nowhere. Instead, simplify, focus, commit, and go deep. Because in a world where everyone is distracted, the ability to focus is rare. And rare abilities create extraordinary results. Remember, it's not about how many things you do. It's about how well you do the things that matter. And when you truly understand that, focus stops being a limitation and becomes your greatest advantage. Turn failure into fuel. Let me tell you something that most people try to avoid their entire lives. Failure is not optional. If you want to do something meaningful, something real, you are going to fail. Not once, not twice, but again and again. And the problem is, most people are not prepared for that. They grow up believing that failure is something to avoid, something embarrassing, something that means you're not good enough. So when it happens, they stop. They step back. They choose something safer. They lower their ambitions just to protect themselves from feeling that pain again. And that's where they lose. Not because they failed, but because they let failure define them. But major thinkers, creators, people who actually build something that matters, they see failure differently. They don't see it as an ending. They see it as fuel, energy, something they can use to move forward. When something doesn't work, they don't ask, why did this happen to me? They ask, what is this trying to teach me? Because every failure carries information. It shows you what doesn't work. It exposes weaknesses. It removes illusions. And that clarity is powerful. Because once you know what doesn't work, you're one step closer to what does. I learned this in one of the hardest moments of my life, when I was pushed out of Apple, the company I built, the company that was part of my identity. Suddenly, it was gone. And for a moment, it felt like everything had ended. There was doubt. There was uncertainty. There was that voice in my head asking, was this all a mistake? That moment is where most people break. Because failure doesn't just challenge your work, it challenges your identity. It makes you question who you are and what you're capable of. And if you're not careful, you start believing the worst. But here's what I realized: failure is not personal. It feels personal, but it's not. It's an event. Something that happened, not something you are. And once you separate the two, you gain control again. You stop reacting emotionally and start thinking clearly. You start asking better questions. What went wrong? What can I improve? What would I do differently next time? And those questions, they turn failure into progress. Because progress is not about getting everything right. It's about learning, adapting, and moving forward. After Apple, I had a choice. I could walk away, or I could start again. And starting again is not easy. It requires humility. It requires you to accept that you're not at the top anymore, that you have to rebuild, step by step. But that's also where the opportunity is. Because when you start again, you're not the same person. You have more experience, more insight, more understanding of what works and what doesn't. And that makes you stronger, better, more prepared for what comes next. That's what failure does. It refines you. It sharpens your thinking. It forces you to grow in ways that success never could. Because success can make you comfortable. But failure makes you aware. It pushes you to improve, to evolve, to become someone who can handle greater challenges. But only if you use it. Because failure doesn't automatically lead to growth. It gives you the opportunity to grow. And that's a choice, every single time. You can ignore the lesson, or you can learn from it. You can blame others, or you can take responsibility. You can give up, or you can try again with more clarity. That choice determines everything. So the next time you fail and you will, don't see it as the end. See it as a signal, a message, something that's guiding you towards something better. Use it. Learn from it. Let it push you forward. Because the people who succeed are not the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who turn it into fuel. They take the pain, the frustration, the disappointment, and we convert it into energy. Energy to try again. Energy to improve. Energy to keep going when others stop. And that is what makes them unstoppable. Because once you stop fearing failure, you remove the biggest limitation holding you back. You become free. Free to take risks. Free to explore. Free to build something truly meaningful. And when you reach that point, failure is no longer something you avoid. It becomes something you use. And that is where real success begins. Build something that matters. Let me tell you something that most people realize too late. Success by itself is not enough. You can achieve goals. You can earn money. You can gain recognition and still feel empty, because success without meaning doesn't fulfill you. It fades. It loses its value over time. But meaning stays. Meaning gives your work purpose. It gives your life direction. And if you want to build something truly great, something that lasts, you have to go beyond success. You have to build something that matters. Most people don't start there. They chase results. They focus on what they can gain. What will I get from this? How will this benefit me? How fast can I succeed? And those questions lead to short-term thinking, to decisions based on convenience, not impact. But if you shift your perspective, if you start asking different questions, everything changes. What value am I creating? How does this help others? What difference does this make? Now you're building something real. Because when your focus shifts from yourself to the impact you create, your work becomes more than just work. It becomes a contribution. And contribution is what gives meaning. When we built products, we weren't just thinking about features. We were thinking about people. How will this feel? How will this improve their experience? How will this empower them to do something they couldn't do before? What made the difference? Because people don't connect with products. They connect with experiences, with how something makes them feel, with how it changes their lives, even in a small way. And when you create something that people truly connect with, it lasts. Not because it's perfect, but because it matters. But building something that matters is not easy. It requires a higher standard, a refusal to settle for average, a commitment to going deeper, even when it's difficult, because meaningful work takes time. It takes effort. It takes attention to detail. The kind of attention that most people overlook, the small things, the things that aren't immediately visible, but are always felt. That's where greatness lives, in the details, in the care, in the intention behind what you create. Because anyone can build something functional. But building something meaningful, that takes a different mindset. It takes patience. Because you're not rushing for quick results. You're building for the long term. You're thinking about impact, not just output. And that requires discipline. Because the world pushes you to move fast, to produce more, to compete. But meaningful work is not about speed. It's about depth. It's about doing fewer things, but doing them exceptionally well. And that brings us back to something important. You don't have to build something for everyone. You don't have to change the entire world. You just have to change something, to make something better than it was before, to solve a problem, to create an experience, to leave a mark in your own way. Because even small things can have a big impact if they're done with intention, if they're done with care, if they're done with a desire to create something that actually matters. And here's the truth, meaning doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you give, from the value you create, from the difference you make. And when you focus on that, success becomes a byproduct, not the goal. You stop chasing recognition. You start chasing excellence. You stop asking, how can I win? You start asking, how can I improve this? And that shift, it changes everything. Because now you're not building for yourself. You're building for something bigger. Something that continues to exist, to inspire, to make a difference. Even when you're no longer there. And that is the kind of work that lasts. The kind of work that people remember. So don't aim for temporary success. Don't aim for quick wins. Aim to build something meaningful, something real, something that reflects your vision, your values, your belief in what's possible, Because in the end,